Hello everyone, this is Kerri Keffeler and welcome to my River Rock bead tutorial. I love making this bead and I hope you will too. In today's tutorial, I'll be using a piece of silver foil, my favorite tool, the bent steel rake, a handheld graphite marver, and the effigy glass colors clear, dark ivory, and white. So I'm starting off with a 332-inch mandrel, and I do recommend this size rather than a smaller mandrel because it's going to be a fairly large bead. I'm actually doing this in a medium size, but I recommend going bigger. This is a wonderful bead to do as a background for other designs, and I use it quite often. I'm starting off by building up a base bead in clear, and there's a few reasons for this. The main reason is because the base of the color of the bead is going to be dark ivory. Dark ivory is a very soft glass. It really loses its shape when you're heating it in a very high temperature, and we're going to be really boiling this glass in this bead, which is a lot of fun. But if we only had the base as pure ivory, it wouldn't hold up very well. So that's why we're starting off with clear. Transparent colors are a lot stiffer than opaque colors, so they make great cores for your beads. Another reason why I'm using this wasn't exactly the clearest batch of clear I've ever had. It was one of those batches of glass that has sat in the back of my studio, and this is a great use for it. I never like to waste glass, so anytime I can incorporate it into a bead where it's not seen is great. That's a good thing to do with imperfect glass. Now the only trick to remember is that your glass must be compatible, so be careful not to mix your COEs with your glass and by using a different COE in the core than the surface. Another thing to watch out for is the formation of bubbles in the core of your bead. So while you're at this stage, it's a really good idea to check carefully, marver your bead, and try to work out any little bubbles that might be appearing. They have a nasty way of working their way to the surface, so you really want to try to eliminate them now while you can. Now I'm building up my base, and I'm adding a little bit more on the sides to extend the footprint of the base a little bit further. This is going to be a fairly good sized bead because I will be drawing something on the bead in the second part of this tutorial. I decided to split this tutorial into two sections because not everyone is going to want to do the design. Some people might just want to only use the organic base bead for their design. And if you watch them both, you can do both. I love using this as a background for a lot of my beads. I often use it for the background for my ravens and for horses. Those are two of my favorites because I do them in black and they're a really nice contrast against this organic design. So I'm going in with my marver, and I'm very careful with the ends of my beads. I want to make sure that I'm always keeping them tapered. It makes it much easier to encase your bead as you progress through the stages of building it up. And now I'm also going to add some more to the center and just keep building and building. The larger you have your core of your bead, the stronger and sturdier it will be. We will be pressing this bead quite flat, so if I didn't have this clear glass, this transparent in the center, it would be really hard for the bead to maintain its shape. So I know this part of the tutorial is rather tedious. You're welcome to fast forward through it. I just really want to show you the steps that I take in the real time that it takes me to make an actual bead. Sometimes I can go a little bit faster, but for the most part, I like to work rather methodically and really take my time. Each of my beads is a special creation, so I don't want to rush it. Adding more clear. And I'm working above the flame a lot as well so you can see what I'm doing, but you might want to really focus on keeping the heat centered right in the middle of your bead. And while you're getting that nice and round, it's a good idea to preheat the rod of the next color that you're going to be using. So here I'm getting my dark ivory ready, and I like to usually warm it up in the top part of the flame. The ivory that I'm using, it's a beautiful color. It's very soft, but it can be shocky at times, which means that it can sometimes snap when I have it in the flame. So now I'm ready to start with my ivory glass. I want to encase this quite thoroughly. I don't really want any of the clear to show, although it really wouldn't be a detriment to the end design. It's still a good habit to get into anyway whenever you're encasing. And most people, when they think of encasing, they think of encasing a clear color over an opaque color. I usually do the opposite. A lot of my beads are opaque, but the inside is clear. So it's kind of a reverse encasement. I always start with my ends. If you've seen my other tutorials, you'll see me do this before. I also make sure that I go in with my marver and touch up the ends frequently through the encasement process. There's a lot of different ways to encase your bead. This is just my preferred method. Some people prefer to start in the center and work to the outside edges of the bead, but I always work from the outside in. Once I know that I have those ends perfectly secure, that the interior color isn't going to seep out the edges, then I don't have to worry so much about the middle. I can just add my glass as I want to. Sometimes I'll do it in a thicker encasement, sometimes a little thinner, depending on the style of bead I'm creating. In this particular case, I'm just doing a swipe method encasement, so just adding small bits of glass a little bit at a time while I rotate the bead. I want to make sure that the core of the bead doesn't get too hot or too molten, because if it does, then as I'm swiping on the exterior color, it will actually distort the bead and pull it off center of the mandrel. That also creates stress on your bead release. So in order to make sure that your bead release doesn't crack through this process, you want to make sure that you keep your heat under control. Keep the bead centered on the mandrel, don't pull too hard when you're encasing, and make sure that the molten glass that you're encasing with is really molten. Don't skimp on the heat. If you try to force it, it's going to crack your bead release and you're going to have to start over. And if you're like me and you take your time, that's kind of a pain. So we want to make sure that we do it right the first time. So here I am overlapping one little bit at a time, checking to make sure that I've covered all of the clear. Again, for this particular design, because it's an organic bead, it would not be the end of the world if a little bit of clear seeped through, because we're going to be actually adding clear to it later on. But again, I try to always make sure that I cover the interior core no matter what I'm creating. I absolutely love dark ivory. It has wonderful properties. It's soft and easy to work with, but it also reacts beautifully with silver, which is what you're going to see. Even on its own, and you can probably see this if you're watching this on a larger monitor, there's beautiful striations of color and almost a webbing effect that takes place just with the glass all by itself. It's just magical. And I use it a lot because of the properties that it has. As I continue to build up my base bead, you'll see me use my marver quite a lot. I want to make sure that I keep the shape exactly where I want it to be. I'm also going to come in with the bent elbow of the steel rake, and that helps me just to push the encasement layer over any spots where I may have missed covering the clear. Don't use the pointy end, and don't let your rake get too hot, because either way will pull the glass away from the core and distort your bead. So, like I say in my other tutorials, a cool tool is the rule. Keep your steel tools cooled in water in between every time they touch the bead. Your marver is the only exception. Graphite won't stick, so that's okay. So I'm still giving the bead quite a bit of heat and just working out the shape. We're going to be having a little bit of fun with the decorating as soon as we get it just right. Again, reshaping the center with my marver. I don't want this bead to actually be terribly round. I want it to be more of a tabular shape. So you can use mashers if you want, or if you have a press, you're welcome to use that too. But because this is an organic river stone bead, I want it to have a little bit of an unusual shape. So this is where the handheld marver is so handy. You can just touch it up and get the shape you want without any other fancy tools whatsoever. It looks like we're just about ready to get started with the fun part, the decorating. Again, I take my time with the base bead because I don't want to have to go back and reshape it too much or fix things that I've missed later on. Now we're going to start by playing with some silver. So I've taken that sheet of silver foil and ripped it into small strips. I recommend ripping it rather than cutting it for a softer, more natural effect. And I just touched the hot bead to the strip of silver, and I pulled it up in front of the flame so you could hopefully see a little bit better what I'm doing. And I wrapped it around with my marver. I wrapped it around the entire bead, and now I'm burnishing it in. It's very important to really rub that silver hard so that it's burnished onto the bead before you do this step. And now I'm getting it really hot and checking to see if I might want to add a little bit more silver. It looks like I've missed a spot there where it would be nice to have a little bit more. So preheat the bead where you want the silver to stick. Pick it up. Don't use your hands. Tweezers are fine as well, but I find if I just set it down and touch the bead to the silver, it works very well. I used my marver to burnish it in, and now the fun begins. So I'm using heat quite liberally here. If you don't burnish the silver foil in very well before you introduce it into the flame, it will actually disappear. It will burn away. What we want to do is have it really adhere to the bead and melt right into that ivory. The silver is going to start reacting with the dark ivory, and you're going to start seeing some magical things happen. Can you see the shades of green and the different deep colors that are appearing? What's happening is as the silver fumes onto the ivory, you get shades of gold and rust, and the silver foil itself will start to shift in different colors. So it's beautiful at this point, but I like to always add more. I'm coming in now with a little bit of white stringer. This is a pre-bought stringer. I don't always pull my own stringer. If I can buy it, my glass in stringer form, I will do that. It gives them a nice uniform look. But in this case, I actually want a little bit of a finer stringer than just the store-bought variety. So I heated the end, and here I am again, pulling a little bit to get a little bit more of a finer stringer. And now I'm just drawing on the bead. There's no particular pattern to this. There's no rhyme or reason. I just like to do a little bit of a random application of stringer all across the bead. Sometimes I'll work along the line of the silver foil, sometimes straight across it. The whole idea is to give this a really organic look and make it seem like something that you just might find in nature. One of my favorite things to do is to go to the beach or to the forest and creeks and rivers and collect rocks. I've got quite an extensive collection. So I've seen some pretty amazing specimens out there, and it's so fun to recreate them in glass. I'll use my pick a little bit from time to time just to touch it up, but for the most part, I am letting heat do the magic. Really, really keeping it centered right in the middle of the flame and giving it a really thorough soaking in the heat. And you'll see that lots of things are going to start to happen. This takes a little while, so you need to be patient, but it's so worth it. I'm coming in now with the clear and creating what I call little windows. Every place that you're going to put some clear over the silver or over the ivory is going to create some depth. It's going to all get melted in, but it's going to achieve a really beautiful effect in the end. And as you can see, we've really only used two colors, white and ivory, and then added in the silver. And look at how colorful this bead already is. You could also substitute the clear with other transparent colors. I've used pale amber. Works very nice. Pale yellow and medium amber are beautiful on this bead. You could do soft shades of blue or purple or pink. It's really up to you. I just tend to prefer clear. I like as much of a natural look to this background as possible, but you can absolutely do any colors that you can think of. I'm almost ready to press my bead, but before I do, I want to make sure that I really give it a lot of heat in the flame. This just further amplifies the beautiful effects that we're going to be getting with the silver. So have some fun with this. Just make sure that you keep the bead centered on the mandrel. Don't let it get out of control and droop or shift in position, otherwise you're going to have a really wonky bead. We want to keep it somewhat centered. You can use a press or you can use mashers. In this case, I'm going to be using my handheld marver and just pressing it on my tabletop, which is a piece of slate, so it works perfectly. And there you can see we are getting closer. It doesn't have to be a perfect shape. It's sort of a tabular shape, which I like. It looks a little bit like a rock that I would find in the river. And actually, I have plans to leave this bead somewhere on a beach so somebody else can find it as a little treasure. So we need a little bit more decoration. More is more. Some of the white has sunk in and disappeared, so I'd like to add a little bit more to the surface of the bead. Again, you can have a lot of fun with this. You could draw designs, you could do a monogram, you could do a swirl or a spiral. I just like to do organic lines and just have them follow some of the other patterns that are already appearing on the bead. Sometimes I'll keep the stringer thick, and sometimes I'll pull the finer little ends, just like I've done here, to give some variety to the lines. And I just rotate back to front, add some little dots, and I like to just keep it interesting. This is the fun part. I know the first part was tedious and long, but it was really worth it because now the ends of my beads are perfectly puckered and smooth. I don't have to worry about them cutting any stringing material if this was ever to be made into a piece of jewelry. It's a good quality base. So when you know that you've done the work at that stage, you can really relax and have fun with the decorating at the end. And then you don't have to go in and reshape the ends at all, which is so nice. I'm coming in with the clear again, creating windows and adding clear over the white because it will really help that white show through a little bit more towards the end. A couple more little dots here and there, and we're almost done. Just going back into the flame a little bit more, keeping everything melted in slowly. And I'm watching how this bead is transforming right before my eyes. Organic beads are so fun to create, especially if you use ivory and silver. You can do absolutely any design you can think of. And these just make beautiful backgrounds for so many other designs that you may want to do. So lots of heat, lots and lots of heat, making sure that I still have control over my bead, and another little press. But this is why we use that transparent glass in the center, so that it's kept its shape when we pressed it flat. There. What do you think? I'm pretty happy with it so far. Just touching up the shape a little bit more. Again, not trying for perfection at all. The beauty of this bead is I want it to be a little natural looking, or as natural looking as possible, so that when somebody finds it, they're really going to wonder, is it a rock or is it something else? Who knows? Unless somebody does Lampwork, they probably will have absolutely no idea, and that's so fun. So here we go. I think we're just about at the end of the bead. I hope you've really enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you've gotten a lot out of it, and I do hope you're going to give this a try. One last thing before we go is you can give this a nice bath in a reduction flame, because what's going to happen is it's going to give a little more fuming from the silver onto the ivory and just give a blush of color. Can you see that starting to show? I love that little touch at the end. It's so pretty. Well, there you go, folks. Part 2 will be next week, so please tune in, and you're going to see what I'm going to decorate on top of this bead. Thank you so much for joining me.